Well, thanks everyone for joining this call. I'm super excited to learn a lot today from Dr. Ron and Dave. My name is Brooke. I'm the Director of Outreach for Fusion Academy, Sugarland, and Houston Galleria. Fusion Academy is a fully accredited private school, and we serve 6th through 12th grade. And it's one-to-one personalized education. So every single class is one teacher to one student. We offer full-time credit recovery and tutoring and mentoring. We have a Woodlands campus as well, and Dusty, our director of outreach, is on the call today as well. And we do have 80 other campuses all over the US. So if you're interested in finding out if a Fusion is near you, you can always email me and I can connect you with our director there. So I'm going to hand it off to Dusty so she can share with you a little bit more.
Hello, everyone. So glad you could join us today. Thank you, Brooke. I just wanted to mention that we do currently have enrollment going on for summer school. And in fact, we have rolling enrollment, and families love us because they can customize the scheduling that fits their family's needs. We have summer school for credit recovery, and we also have kiddos that just like to get ahead for the next year, or they want to take an enrichment class. And we have no problem working with your homeschool to transfer those credits in. So if you have any questions about summer school, please let me or Brooke know, and we are happy to give a tour to any prospective families. Thank you.
Okay, Julie, would you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Pomerantz, and I'm with the Hub Houston. The Hub stands for Heard, Understood, Believed in. And we have a school for ages 13 to 18 for children who happen to be on the autism spectrum. We also work with children with ADHD, anxiety, mild depression, any medical issues. We also have a young adult campus serving that same population from ages 18 and up. And then we offer a social club 3 nights a week, again for ages 18 and up. All this is that same population. And finally, we have another program called Aspire Accessories. Again, this is for ages 18 and up. For those who happen to be on the autism spectrum. And we refer to those members at Aspire as artisans, and they are creating magnificent items that are sold online and at markets. So we do have many programs available, and thank you all for being here today. I look forward to this talk specifically.
Great, thank you, Julie. Right on.
Hi, I'm Alexandra Roark. I'm here with Dr. Ron Swatina at the Houston Neuroscience Brain Center. I'm the child and adolescent therapist here. We're a diagnostic center where we do EEGs to look for neurobiomarkers that could account for symptoms of anxiety, depression, learning issues, and much more. And then we optimize the brain using neurofeedback training, and we also offer therapy services to all ages and photobiomodulation services. This summer, we have a brain camp for people who are wanting to optimize their brain. It's a 2-week intensive neurofeedback training camp. And thank you so much for coming in today. We appreciate you taking the time to join us and join the conversation. I would like to give some background information on our guest speaker today, Dave Gaines. Dave Gaines is a social worker, advocate, and the Chief Executive Officer of Sacramento Autistic Spectrum and Special Needs Alliance, which is a nonprofit social services organization serving children and young adults with various mental diagnoses and their families in the Sacramento, California region. His background is in psychology and applied behavioral analysis. I'm gonna turn it back over.
All right, so what I'd like to do, Dave, I think I want to go ahead and start with you because what I'm looking at the research, the part I'm going to present on is mostly about interventions and what the research says about current interventions. So if you want to go ahead and share your screen, we'll let you go first and then save me some time, would you please?
Absolutely.
All right.
All right, let me get my Okay, you able to see my screen there? All good. All right. All right. Hi, folks. So I'm Dave Gaines. I'm the CEO of Sacramento Autistic Spectrum Special Needs Alliance. We're a nonprofit, Sacramento, California. We do comprehensive social services for young folks, children, young adults, and their families, not just on the autistic spectrum, but other diagnoses. And I happened to discover these events that Dr. Ron does. He's based out of Texas, and I found them interesting. So I've picked up a little bit of an obsession with going over research on autism and other conditions over the last couple years. And Dr. Ron asked me to pick out just a few studies. I looked to kind of cover a variety of topics. So these are kind of spread out, but I wanted to touch on maybe some more interesting points regarding autism. And provide some scientific information on what's going on there. So first one here. All right. So here is a recent study, International Journal of Molecular Sciences. Basically, what they did here, if you have some familiarity with autism, you've probably heard about the correlation with gastrointestinal characteristics and the autism spectrum. It's something that over the years has gone from controversial to abundantly scientifically clear that there is a connection between autism and gastrointestinal characteristics and symptoms, probably more along the lines of issues, whether it's things like constipation, diarrhea, and other types of GI issues. So this is another study of the many that is in that domain.
Hey, Dave, nothing's
Yes,
opening up. We don't see anything on your screen, but your little PDF and nothing's opening up.
You don't see the research study?
No.
Okay, give me 1 second. I think I know what the issue is.
I'm just letting you know, because all we see is those 4 studies you've got published up.
Yeah, appreciate it. All right, let me see.
Apparently they just didn't open up when you open them up.
No, yeah, I know what it is. 1 sec. You should see it now. Okay.
Yes, I do see it.
Very good. Thank you, Lisa. I may need to close and open the screen share as I go through the 4 articles here, because it looks like they have to be selected independently. Okay, so in this study, they did analysis of the gut microbiome, which is the bacteria that are inside of our intestines and stomach. We have thousands and thousands of bacteria that live inside of us that we are dependent on to do all sorts of things for us. So these are beneficial bacteria. Most of us think of bacteria as negative, but there are plenty that we are really dependent on. So what they often do is they will pull the genes often through the fecal matter of all the bacteria that are present in someone's gastrointestinal system, and they can identify based upon those genes what bacterial species are present in the gut. And there are several methods for that. In this one, they included what's called a shotgun metagenomic method, along with some typical sequencing that they do. So they looked at the genes or the genes indicating the bacterial species that were present in both children with autism and typically developing children. I think they identified about 5,500 different species, and they compared them. And then what they did here, this is actually an intervention study, is they did this procedure called the microbiota transfer therapy, which is gaining in research, and actually very impressive research. It's not yet available as a treatment because it hasn't been cleared by the FDA yet. But this is where they take the genes, or I'm sorry, the bacterial species from healthy individuals and transplant them into individuals with needs that have gut microbiome that are in dysbiosis or unbalanced. And we're seeing that the folks that receive the healthy transplant actually they have positive changes in their gut microbiota more towards a healthy, typical developing person. So they did that in this study, and they found that there were significant differences between autistic children and typically developing children. At the beginning of the study, they did the microbiota transfer therapy, and 10 weeks after that transfer study, they compared the bacterial species again, and I'm going to scroll here. All right, so here is the autistic children. This first column here is typically developing, so you see much less, red means less, than these typical developing. And then the middle one here, you see much more green. It resembles much more closely the typical developing children. So after 10 weeks, there was a significant increase or balancing out in these bacterial species to resemble healthy typical developing peers. And then after 2 years, there was a significant change. And some of those gains were lost, but there still were some that were better balanced. And so that's what they determined. That's what they found. And the two primary areas that were very interesting to them were sulfur metabolism and oxidative stress. So that means the most significant differences in the gut microbiota were bacteria that were involved in our bodily process of converting sulfur compounds inside our body, as well as that are responsible for managing oxidative stress, which is something that is something that occurs in all of us through our mitochondria processing energy and all this. And it has been significantly linked that there is high oxidative stress in individuals with autism. So that was very interesting. These changes, there is a connection between the gut and the brain, very significant scientifically proven connection. Differences in the gut, you're going to influence neurological activity. And then these other bodily processes, autism is not just a neurological condition, it is a whole body condition. We see differences in all sorts of physical processes, which you can measure with blood tests, for example. And so that was the primary finding here. I will move to the second one, and I wonder if this will come up without me needing to reset the screen share. All right, are you able to see the new study? Okay, thank you, Dr. Ron. I see your thumbs up there. Okay, this one, this is, I believe this is a brand new one, yeah, from March, from Nature Neuroscience. This I only have the abstract for because it is a paid study. I didn't want to violate any copyrights by displaying it publicly, so the abstract is free. Molecular network level mechanisms explaining individual differences in autism spectrum disorder. What do those big words mean? Well, basically, what this study did, and there's your abstract, the summary. They did brain imaging of individuals with autism, and then they let's see, this was okay. So they looked at all these brain images of people on the spectrum, and then they compared that information to what typical brain imaging looks like, as well as how genes express themselves in the brain. And what they were able to do is they found differences in the connections of different areas of the brain. So in our thinking, in our different processes, our things that we do, the cognitive states that we have, different parts of our brain work together to make those things happen. And when they looked at differing brain network connections, they found that they were able to take all those autistic individuals and break them down into 4 subgroups. So they found 4 patterns across all these people where there were groups of folks in each of these 4 areas where there were similarities in the way that these different brain regions connected. And these different brain regions, 4 different similar patterns, also correlated, meaning they showed that they had different clinical profiles, meaning that the way that their autism manifested, the way you could see their autistic characteristics were different in terms of maybe cognitive skills, social skills, maybe stereotypical behaviors, things like that. So they were able to identify those 4 groups and then look at the genes that were responsible in those areas, and they found that the differences were accounted for by gene expression. They were also able to link those genes to distinct molecular signaling pathways. Basically, that just means biological things going on in the body. So primarily immune functioning synapses, so the little spaces between neurons, that's a synapse. G protein coupled receptor signaling, that's a big one. We won't get into that. Synthesis of proteins and other things like that. So really the focus of this study, which I want to highlight, is that it is pretty clear at this point that there are subtypes of autism. It is not one condition, and we have different, so we have autism, but we have these groups and patterns of people that are autistic that have similar types of traits and characteristics. And we need to look at those differences because not all autistic people are the same in the way that their characteristics present. And so we need to address intervention and assistance for those folks in different ways that are based upon their unique profiles. All right, I will go to the next one. Right. Okay, this is another interesting study from Cell Reports. So I like this because it has a little graphic on there. So this study is about prenatal environmental stressors, prenatal meaning a pregnant mother when the baby is inside the mom's body, prenatal environmental stressors, so things that are external to the mom. They are impairing postnatal, so after the baby is born, and I will explain what microglia are, microglia function, and adult behavior in males. So this study is great because it touches on several very interesting topics related to autism. So basically what happened here, nice little graphic, this was done on mice, okay? So we don't want to say 100% for sure that this is going to translate to humans, but mice are often used in studies. There is a lot of translation. It's not always the case, but just keep in mind that it is with mice, so it's not 100% necessarily going to translate to humans, though there is a lot of stuff showing that this probably is happening in humans. Other research studies. So pregnant mice were exposed to air pollution as well as maternal stress So I believe in this instance, they reduced the amount of food the mice received, which created stress. So this translates to human moms, air pollution, as well as stressful events in a mom's life while she's pregnant. And what they saw is that the mom's immune system activated, and it influenced the developing brain of the child inside the mom. The immune system, activated, sent some proteins in her body, and those proteins went to the baby's brain. And so it created some differences there. After those baby mice were born, we noticed that primarily in male mice, not female, but male mice, there was long-term differences in social and communication behavior in those mice. So they looked at how frequently the mice interacted with other mice versus spending time alone compared to mice that were typical, and how, and they saw reduced social behavior among these mice. So it's interesting to note that this was primarily in male mice. There is this discussion of male versus female ratios in human autism diagnosis. Traditionally, we're looking at a much larger diagnostic for males to have autism, about 4 to 1. That number appears to be, the gap appears to be becoming smaller. There is some discussion on whether it's just based on biased diagnostic criteria or biological actual causes for that. It appears at this time the research is showing it's a combination of both. There does appear to be several reasons why biologically males are going to be more susceptible to autism. We also see that with other neurodevelopmental conditions like ADHD and so on. So this actually identified a biological reason for males having the diagnosis of autism more often than females, differences in genetics and body physiological composition. And so what they noticed is so microglia are basically the immune cells of the brain, and they help clean out the brain, keep it clear of problems, keep it fresh, getting rid of dead cells or non-functioning cells. They found that what was going on was there was a suppression, a decrease in the functioning of these microglia. And so we would see a reduction in the cleaning and the clearing out of things going on in the brain. And they tested that by doing some intervention by forcing a drug-induced reduction of microglia activity. And they found when they took typical mice without any maternal issues, and they purposely drug changed the microglia, they also found the impaired social behavior, and that's how they proved the connection. So very interesting, touches on that autism has potentially some environmental causes, as well as why there would be more males as opposed to females. And I will tell you, air pollution has numerous studies in terms of showing a correlation with autism and other neurodevelopmental conditions. I think it's pretty clear at this point that there are environmental components interacting with the genetics to create these neurodevelopmental diagnoses, autism, ADHD, and others. Last one. This one actually involved UC Davis. I believe the My Institute, maybe not, but it was definitely UC Davis. Let me see. No, can't tell here from these folks. So this is a super interesting study that looked at plasma, which is blood and fecal metabolites. Metabolites are the result of chemical reactions in the body. So whenever our body does something, like changes sugar, carbohydrates into energy, or processes the stuff we eat, there are resulting chemicals that come out of those chemical reactions. Those are metabolites. So they looked. We can look at metabolites to see how chemical reactions of different types are happening in all over the body. So they looked at the blood and fecal profiles in autistic children. Don't believe they included adults here. Yeah, so only children. So they did analysis. Unfortunately, the amazing analysis that they use is only available for research. It's not available to consumers. I wish it was. But it does a really significant look at all metabolites, basically, that they can detect. It's a huge number. So you can look at all of these bodily processes that are occurring. So they looked at global metabolome, which is the metabolite profiles, 231 blood, 97 fecal samples, a large cohort of children with ASD, and then typically developing kids. So they found a lot of differences in metabolite profiles between autistic children and neurotypical children. What does that mean? Well, that means that the bodies of autistic children have a lot of different chemical reactions occurring in significantly different ways than neurotypical children. And this is a whole bunch of different things. The primary, let's see, primary differences. I really love this study, and it has a great chart. Let's see if I can. Here we go. So this chart is nice. You may not be able to see it. Maybe you can. I don't know. Because it looks at their primary findings, so lipids. So that means that the fat or lipid processing activities in the body were one of the most significantly different in autistic children. And lipids include steroid hormones, polyunsaturated fatty acids, all this kind of stuff. So we look at like pregnenolone and androgen hormone metabolite levels elevated. Some of these things are actually intervention related. You can increase pregnenolone, androgen levels, and in some studies they're looking at that and seeing if it makes a difference in autistic characteristics that need intervention. The other ones were mitochondrial function. That's a big one. We see 10 times higher rates of mitochondrial disorders in autistic individuals as opposed to the typical population, 0.5% of typical population, 5% in the autistic population. This has a lot to do with energy. I see a lot of autistic individuals that I work with that have lethargy, a lot of adults that are really, really tired. And you can see this in some children as well, not all of them. Some are actually very, very energetic. But we are seeing mitochondrial differences. So the processing of energy, mitochondria do a lot of other things as well, including a huge function in the brain in terms of brain growth and development. Also, here we go, microbiome, which is the xenobiotic and right here, phenolic metabolites. So again, looking at, there's definite differences in the chemical processes occurring in the gut with those bacteria. They also looked at some potential biomarkers for autism in things that were significantly different between typically developing children and autistic children. These are the ones they found. So this kind of tells you some key areas that we're seeing these biological differences. What does this tell us? This tells us that autism is not just a brain condition. It is a whole body condition, and many characteristics of the body are impacted, most significantly gastrointestinal, mitochondrial, and then some of these other processing like lipids, also amino acids, things like that. We can address these imbalances and we can remediate some issues, including gastrointestinal issues, some neurological issues, meaning cognitive improvements, behavioral improvements, things like that. So breaking news, no one's telling you that autism is a full body condition. It is. And you can test these things with blood tests and urine tests, and you can start addressing some of these differences. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Ron. I hope I didn't take up too much time. And let me kill my screen share. If you know how to do that, feel free.
You just go to the bottom.
I don't, oh, here we go.
There you go.
Okay.
All right. Well, we finally have Pam here. Okay, let's get on with the rest of this. Now, I wanted to have Dave here because I knew he was going to crawl into this. And let me share my screen with you from the, or is it screen share? Okay, got the PowerPoint up here. Okay. Now, what I looked at was a little bit different. And what I wanted to put this full screen, minimize this. Okay. I want to look at it from a completely different way of going into it. And I want to jump into it because I want to get into what we're actually seeing repetitive transcranial mechanism. Okay. The connection between autism, epilepsy, and psychopathologies are not a rare association. And these are the reviews that I actually came up with that talked about how common it occurs. We're finishing a study on 1,233 cases, not all autistic, but in our autistic spectrum. We published a paper back in, I guess it was 2017, on the prevalence rate of these isolated epileptiform discharges. They may not have epilepsy, but they've got epileptic activity going on in their brains. And it's in about, we found it instead of 4 to 86, we found it in about 40%, 38.7, almost 40% of all autistic children have this seizure activity going on inside their brain. And why this is important is because most medications that they treat autism with, which there is no medication for autism, they treat the other things, are stimulants, antidepressants, and which is the SSRIs, SNRIs, and then they treat it with the antipsychotics when the behavior is out of control. All of those medications make this seizure activity worse and can make the child worse. So this is one of the things that we have done in our center for the past 15 years, is really looked at how prevalent this activity was, because the brains are unstable. I looked at these studies now on the impact of transcranial direct current stimulation on autism, and this is a study. We found 3 studies that were involved in this. There is limited amount of support for it, but what I wanted to do is present what the industry has some positive findings that suggest that this may be an efficacious treatment for children and adolescents and adults with autism. So transcranial magnetic stimulation, it uses a magnetic field in order to adjust or modify the firing of the neurons so that we can put them to a more normal state. And so, like I say, I wanted to do this presentation specifically so we can give you guys this information as to how we're actually changing the field in regard to how we treat autism or those with autism. So again, limited amount of research on it, but something that could be considered. There's 6 studies, and this is PubMed Medline for lights for autism, exploration into photobiomodulation, which we're doing here now. And there's some pretty positive results going on. So the way, and what Dave was talking about in the brain and mitochondria and everything else, the photobiomodulation uses near-infrared light at 810 nanometers in order to penetrate the cranium down into the brain, all the way down to the mitochondrial level, where it stimulates the release of nitrous oxide. Now, nitrous oxide is very important because it actually works to remove the reactive oxygen species. Basically, like Dave was saying, take out the trash. We got to get the brain clear of the toxins and the waste materials of the brain. And that happens at night, normally during deep sleep. And then it goes down through your cerebral spinal fluid, and out through your, back down through the spine and everything like this. So this is one of the things. It's a very non-invasive type of treatment. Do you want to expand on how it works with the with your piece of equipment?
Yeah, so with my piece of equipment, the helmet per se is the 1020 system. So I have 6 diodes that put out the near infrared light, and I can choose where it goes. And so we can use the EEG to guide the location and to create an individualized treatment protocol, because my system will allow me to choose how much light to put out and a frequency. So we could do like a 10 hertz, 12 hertz, 15 hertz. It has a very wide range from like 0 to like 12,000 hertz.
This is like I say, the neat thing about it is it's it doesn't take a lot of time. It was about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
About 20 minutes, but it really does change how the brain functions and starts to get it to function better. And so we've got 6 studies that are showing some pretty good promise in the area of photobiomodulation. I think one of the main things that it does is it increases microcapillary blood flow, which brings in more blood, meaning more oxygen into the brain. And there's some really interesting studies in regard to, if you increase the oxygen to the brain, you increase the ability for the brain to process effectively. So that's what's going on in photobiomodulations. Transcranial, this is another study on this. It's a retrospective study on, again, photobiomodulation for the treatment of children with autism. It's up and coming, so I think it's in this current study, they had only a small N of 21, but that's still encouraging. Reduction in non-compliant behavior, reduction in parental stress, and reduction in behavior on cognitive rigidity. So improvements in attention functions and sleep quality. And that's one thing that we've noticed is really a good improvement in the sleep. The quality of sleep is so critical to everyone, but so this is not just for that. We use photobiomodulation for long COVID. It's been shown to reduce inflammation in long COVID. So the brain fog that you have, or if you've been through chemo treatment, the fog you can get after that. So there's a lot of variety for ways, and it's actually the first photobiomodulation that's just got FDA approval in the United States, thankfully, for the treatment of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. So a lot of applications for this photobiomodulation. There's 39 studies I found in hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which may improve the symptoms in autistic children. The case reports, there's SPEC and multiple SPEC and PET, PET studies that have been done. Again, it's not out there yet. It's not ready for prime time, but at least we're going that direction. So I think that it's hyperbaric oxygen. We have our chamber. We're about ready to start doing some work in regard to treating children with autism. So that's on the horizon. Hopefully this summer it will be fully operational. We'll be able to do some of this as well. And what hyperbaric oxygen does is when you take them down to 1.3 or 1.5 or 2 atmospheres, you increase the partial pressure of oxygen. Because you increase the partial pressure of all the air in the chamber, it's going to increase the partial pressure of oxygen. So even without additive of breathing oxygen on a non-rebreather, on a rebreather mask of, we put it up to, I think ours produces about 98% oxygen. So that it furthermore increases that. And studies have shown that the lack of perfusion to these areas correlates with repetitive and self-stimulatory and stereotypical behaviors, impairment of communication, sensory perception, and social interactions. Hypoperfusion is lack of blood flow. So if we can get more blood flow and increase the microcapillary blood flow and increase the oxygen into these areas, that's where they're seeing the gains. So I think that's very encouraging for the industry to have something like this, which is not a medication, because as we know, there's no medication to treat autism. But this treats, the thing about this over the photobiomodulation is that you treat the whole body. You can't just stick your head in the chamber. You got to get into the chamber yourself. So as Dave just very, very profoundly let everybody know, that autism is not just about the brain, it's about the whole body. So here's some of the advantages for that. HBOT can compensate for a decreased blood flow by increasing the oxygen content. It is potent for an anti-inflammatory effects and reduces oxidative stress, as Dave was talking about the oxidative stress earlier. So let's reduce the inflammation, because this is we have a lot of these hyper. I think a lot of autistic children, what I call, they have a hyper response to small provocation. They get really angry easy. And so that's usually what we see in these cases that have spindling excessive beta, which we can identify, and we think is connected to an inflammation in the brain. It mobilizes the stem cells from the human bone marrow, and which may aid in recovery of neurodegenerative diseases. And based upon these findings, it's hypothesized that HBOT will improve symptoms in autistic individuals. We're really looking for more research in this area, and that's why we're going to try to do some research as well. These are some of the studies that we did. 62 children, 6 centers. Again, HBOT, we found significant improvements in overall functioning, receptive language, social interactions, eye contact, sensory and cognitive awareness. Nothing they did but just jump into a chamber for it. It's an hour dive. It takes 15 minutes to blow it down, 15 minutes to come back up. So it's about a 75-minute. And this was just with children to receive slightly pressurized room air. This wasn't the fully it says here 1.3 atmospheres at 24% oxygen. The reason they got the 24% oxygen is that when you put it down to 1.3 atmospheres, the oxygen is like at 24%. Another one on the hyperbaric oxygen therapy with children in autism spectrum, a review. None of the 10 literature reviews indicates that HBOT was clearly effective form of therapy in a case of ASD. I always like to report the other side as well. The second thing here, review the literature on whether HBOT as a therapy significantly affects the symptoms of ADHD. It does not confirm its effectiveness. So there are they say 4 studies here basically are just not really supporting it. So we need more studies. There's studies that are saying things. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But I would rather have a lot more research in this area. These are neurofeedback outcomes with children with Asperger's syndrome and on the autistic spectrum. And I'm just listing these to show that neurofeedback has been shown. And we have seen quite an amazing, especially in nonverbal autistic children, we were able to get language in each one of them, which is just phenomenal. It's a totally incredible thing to be able to see for these children to be able to all of a sudden start having language. I think the more autistic a child is, the more behavioral expression of the autism there is, the more that neurofeedback seems to help. The Asperger's, I don't think, the more typical they are, the less you are impressed with the outcomes from neurofeedback. Well, we really like neurofeedback. I've been using it in this area since 2003 with autistic children. Children with autism, excuse me, I need to get that right. And I think it's something that we've got 87 studies out there on neurofeedback, so it's got a lot of support. This is just some of the studies that we found on the neurofeedback training in children with autism spectrum disorder. Again, the relative power is what we look at when we're looking at the EEG. We do individualized protocols for each child. Each person that comes in that gets neurofeedback, it's all designed based on their individual EEGs. It's just more about the efficacy. I like to cite the studies that do this. This was a study in 2021, just recently put out a couple of years ago. 42 children with ASD received neurofeedback aiming at improving cognitive abilities. The cognitive function was improved with the neurofeedback treatment. So this is a study that I was actually a co-author in. It's the first machine learning artificial intelligence study with a colleague of mine out of Italy, Enzo Grassi. And what we found here is that the autistic spectrum children, we had 25 autistic spectrum children and 25 children in the blue here that had everything but autism. I don't have controls in my data archive. I've got everything but autism. And you can see the brain of the autistic child is radically different than the brain of the other children with OCD, ODD, ADHD, all those other acronyms. this was really an amazing thing because what we found is that age didn't make a difference. So we're hypothesizing we can go down to 2 months old and do an EEG, run it through this process, and identify an autistic child's brain before they're ever expressing any of the symptoms. So kind of a neat study. Autism spectrum disorder. There's a complexity of ASD, neuroatypical development. One of the things that Dave brought up that my buddy Enzo Grassi was able to determine, chemical exposure was a number one thing to the mothers while she was pregnant in order to for her to have an autistic child. That was really kind of interesting because Dave was talking about the pollution. Well, if you think about it, pollution is a chemical exposure. Neuroinflammation is common to these children and adults, and neuroatypical pathways in the language and social and executive function regions. Dave hit on this too, so perfect connection of what Dave was giving you and the findings of this. Treatment logic. Neuroinflammation treatment improves sleep and reduces reactivity, improves microcapillary blood flow as well. Addresses the intake, EMF exposure. We really need to address what the person is eating. A lot of children with autism and everybody, and I can't just say children with autism, a lot of people have issues with their nutritional intake. We have to assess that. More keto, more slanted diet is much better for all brains. EMF exposure is a big deal. We've touched on in the past with one of our prior ones, electromagnetic fields that come from your computer. That's why I'm wearing my blue light glasses, from your routers in your house to everything else. And exercise. Exercise is really, really critical to helping the body work effectively. And as Dave said, we see that there's a lot of it's more in males, and their metabolism isn't as fast. They're fatigued a lot, so they're not exercising as much. I think if we put our time into addressing the intake, the EMF exposure, and the exercise issue, and also it would improve their sleep. And we want to create more functional pathways. Okay.
That's the next one.
Okay. Let me get out of this.
We're coming up to the part where we're going to take some questions where you can feel free to, just ask them through your speaker or type them in the chat box. But before we do, I would like to announce our next discussions with Dr. Ron webinar. It's going to be Wednesday, May 17th from 12 to 1 p.m. Central. And I'm so excited for this next topic. We're going to have a guest speaker, Karen D. Ong. She's a speech and language pathologist and therapist. And she's going to be doing a discussion on how the tongue informs healthy or unhealthy neurocognitive development. Me and Dr. Ron have talked to her about it before, and it is truly fascinating how tongue posture is so important to development and brain communication. So please join us for that. We'll send out the registration link later.
Now, this Karen is quite an interesting individual. She talks very fast, so you've really got to, I'm glad we're recording it because you're going to have it recorded. But did you know the tongue pressing against the roof of the mouth actually signals neurochemistry to be released? Totally fascinating. Tongue-tied individuals that just had their tongues clipped so that they could have use of that often have palates that are misshapen. They're more like a chapel than a cave. And it's and that makes all the difference in the world. And in fact, it modifies what they eat. So because they can't eat certain foods because their tongue can't keep it from going down a windpipe. So it's going to be a fascinating presentation. You guys will just be blown away by her. I highly recommend it. And so let's open it up for questions. We have time now. Do we have any questions in the chat or anything?
Not yet.
Yes, Julie?
Hi, I have first of all, completely fascinating, both presentations. I'm just blown away. I was madly taking notes. But Dr. Gaines, if I could just ask you a question with regard to pregnant women, so many living in huge cities, unfortunately, with lots of pollution, and also so many pregnant people these days working full time, being pregnant, who knows, they might have younger children, etc. It all spells out stress in capital letters. Is there anything you can share with us that would help a pregnant mom in these two categories to reduce the stress and how to avoid the pollution? I might have said population earlier. I meant pollution.
Sure. First, I'll say I do not have a doctoral degree, so I'm not a Dr. Gaines. not quite at Dr. Ron's level. The
He
master's degree.
sounds like it though, doesn't he? You should have one.
Thank you. I'm a big nerd. Well, yeah, the reality is that, and this is hard science. I'm not a person that likes to have an agenda-based picture on things. The hard science is showing us more and more that our environment is heavily polluted, from the foods we eat to the air we breathe, the products that we purchase. Almost everything I buy these days has a Proposition 65 warning on it from the state of California. And so with the maternal stress, maybe that's a little easier. That we can impact, I think, to a greater extent. The reality through abundant science is that the stress in our lives literally impacts us physically, mentally, increases our chances of disease later on in life, decreases our lifespan. These things can be measured, for example, through epigenetic analyses, things like that. We know stress is real. In America, we work hard, we have stressful lives. We need to start recognizing that this literally is impacting our physical and mental health. And some of these things, epigenetics, can be passed on from parents to children. So, you know, we want moms to have as comfortable a life as possible, right? We want them to have housing and food and good medical care. There's only so much, I guess, you can do in some cases, right? I mean, we all have to worry about things like bills and things, stressors in our life. But as much as you can control that, and I mean, you know, we can do social things, I guess, to support parents, increase social programs. It's potentially one discussion. But moms need to, I think the most important thing as a pregnant mom is to take awareness of your stress levels and to practice things that are going to keep you calm, engage in activities that make you happy, you know, make sure you get plenty of sleep, eat well, you know, do meditation, listen to calming music, whatever kind of gets you calmed down. So be aware of that kind of stuff. Seek out emotional support when you're pregnant. Be there with your friends. Be there with if counselors to help process emotional things that are going on. As far as the environmental pollution, we can't get away from a lot of this stuff. We cannot get away from it. We are forced to be exposed to this because of the society we've created. You know, you want to move to the country. I don't, you know, that's a big thing for a lot of people to relocate. But honestly, relocating, there's huge differences in pollution in different areas, different geographic areas. You can look these things up on the internet and see there's lots of statistics on this stuff. You know, maybe for your indoor, I recently bought, after going through these studies, I recently bought a home air purifier. There's some good ones, you know, make sure it's a HEPA filter certified one. And, you know, that can help clear out some of the air inside your home. There's research to support that. Yeah, it's tough on the air pollution thing, but I think relocation is probably the biggest thing you can do, but it's hard for a lot of people.
Appreciate that, Dave. That's great response. I've got a question here. My son has severe migraines and autism. How can these therapies help both issues? Well, migraines is brains don't hurt, vascular system in the brains hurt, and a migraine has to do with how there's some sort of ischemic process going on. Well, inflammation can cause ischemia, can cause a narrowing of the area for the arteries and veins to pass through. So you can get that. So when we're talking about increasing perfusion in the brain, we're talking about increasing the microcapillary vessels. I mean, you actually increase the capillaries of the brain especially with the hyperbaric oxygen and with the photobiomodulation. The neurofeedback does the same thing, but it's through neutral positive perfusion. So it's all of them can help, and we've treated migraines for many, many years with in those with and without autism, and successfully with just the neurofeedback. But now we have other ways we can do it as well. Another question says, my children have been diagnosed under the autistic under the spectrum as Asperger's. Do you consider they may need neurological study besides the psychological study? Psychological evaluations, neuropsych testing measures level of impairment. Great. If you need that for 501s accommodations, yes, you're going to need that. It depends on how your children are functioning. If you think that there's, I always say that a mother's gut's the best diagnostic tool we have in the industry. So if you think that that in your gut that we need to take a look at their brain, by all means, let's do it. Because there's something you suspect that's atypical that we may be able to address with. And our purpose about doing these EEG, QEEG studies is to get to what's the underlying condition or situation or abnormality in the brain or the body that's causing this expression of symptoms. So, of course, I'm always wanting to look at brains, so I'm going to say that anyway. But
Can I
think we should look at them. What's that?
Can I get in on this one too?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah. So a psychological study, that's just diagnostic. So all that does is a person looking at the individual, and looking at behaviors and measuring some cognitive functioning with some tests and coming up with a diagnosis. So the problem with our understanding of autism is that it's only been diagnosed through observation, through psychology, and it's been classified as a psychological diagnosis. It is not. Autism needs to be now classified as a full body thing, because the psychological component makes us think that it's strictly a neurological condition. So the mainstream approach to autism is a decade or two behind the research, and the translational research stuff is common to be delayed. But not everyone on the autistic spectrum has challenges. Some people do okay in life. Some people do have challenges. For those that want to have challenges addressed, every autistic person that may need some intervention or assistance should absolutely have different neurological evaluations. There are different ones. There's MRIs, the EEGs, the SPECT scans that all look at different things. The other thing, every autistic person, whether they have neurological challenges or gastrointestinal challenges, should have full blood evaluations and urine testing. Also, and now it's even mainstream recommended by the mainstream medical community, everyone with an autistic diagnosis should have a full genome analysis, full DNA. So those sets, psychological for the diagnosis and neuropsychological to look at cognitive characteristics. There's different neurological evaluations which are helpful. And then there's blood and urine testing, perhaps some hair testing, which is coming into the research. And then definitely full DNA analysis. There are fascinating things you can learn about yourself and how to improve different areas of your functioning from these things.
Excellent, Dave. I want to let everybody know that I've got this next hour open so I can keep the questions coming. But before I do that, Pam, would you go ahead and make your announcement, please, since you were late? Unmute yourself.
Okay. Sorry. Yes, I got delayed at something else. I'm Pam Esser, Director of ADDIS Southern Region. We're the Attention Deficit Disorders Association Southern Region. I did drop something in the chat before I forgot. We're having one on stress tomorrow evening as our group presentation. So in light of talking about it today, I do think that's a really important topic. We do free virtual support groups, about 5 per month, as well as this one with Dr. Ron. And then we have workshops. Sadly, our one on Saturday has been postponed because our speaker is ill, but stay tuned and check us out because we offer a lot of different things throughout the year. Thank you.
All right, great. Dave, looks like a good question for you here about the probiotics. Is there anyone specifically recommended, or is it you get the evaluation?
Well, so ultimately the best way to do anything is through analysis first.
Great.
And we can do that with all the other interventions. That's why the blood testing, the urine testing. So I would recommend doing a fecal analysis. You can get these things yourself. We are a seller for one company that has these. You can contact me if you have questions about good ones. Some are better than others in terms of the quality. But you can do you may even be able to get it through your physician. So doing that testing is probably the way to go, because then you can look at the community of little guys living inside you, and then based upon that, you can tailor a specific regimen of probiotics, prebiotics, other things, as well as maybe dietary interventions to change the composition to something that may address any issues that are occurring. There are some specific strains of probiotics, specific bacteria that seem to have an effect on a larger group of autistic folks. So you could potentially take some of these and try it. It's not going to be 100%. Again, people with autism are very different. We're not looking at similarity across all autistic people, and that's why one intervention doesn't work for all people, because their brains and their other biological components are not all the same. In fact, it's possible that autism is actually not one diagnosis, but a whole bunch of separate diagnoses with separate causes that have been erroneously encapsulated under one diagnosis because of only being psychologically observed. It's been erroneously labeled that way. But so there are some that you could potentially look at. Just it's throwing it and see what sticks. If it's not going to be harmful usually. But there's some different ones out there. I don't want to probably make any specific recommendations live. But if you want to contact me, I put my email. I can tell you some stuff. But if you Google it, there's some companies that are selling some things. Some of those are research based on the ones that have been shown to make some difference in some people on the spectrum in terms of GI issues or improving cognitive functioning. So you won't have any shortage of finding stuff. And some of those mainstream ones are okay. Some are probably kind of junky, and you should know what's a good probiotic versus a low quality one.
Right. There was a question up here I thought was kind of interesting. Would hyperbaric oxygen and neurofeedback therapies help with better eating habits among kids with ASD? It's difficult to get them to eat certain foods. This has been a struggle with this population for the longest time. We see that they do have sensitivities to textures at a higher rate, I think, than most children. I wish we could change habits with neurofeedback or hyperbaric oxygen or photobiomodulation, but I think that's the part that, since it would be a good question to bring up next month with Karen D about this. It may have something to do with their tongue, with their palate. More so, I didn't realize this until I brought her another case the other day, and she was telling me about how the way the palate is shaped almost determines which foods the kids would like to eat or not eat, just the way it was made up. So it was kind of interesting, but I think that that's going to take a different. Well, you got any insight on that, Dave? I see you unclicked.
Sure. Yeah, I am not an expert on neurofeedback. That's actually something we're getting into. We're going to be acquiring a neurofeedback and photobiomodulation helmet device, a brand new one, soon. So I'm looking to play around with that. I don't think, though, based upon my understanding, that neurofeedback is something that would be helpful with eating. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Ron. Hyperbaric. Yeah, hyperbaric, I don't know. There may be some research on that or not. It's not typically considered an intervention for eating. With eating, we do see that with a lot of people on the spectrum. Often it's a sensory issue. I think there are also some biological issues in terms of gastrointestinal and other bodily physiological functions that are occurring that will impact what a person wants to eat. I think the mainstream intervention is a behavioral approach, applied behavior analysis in terms of using behavioral methods to increase the amount of foods that a person eats. Also, speech therapists can address this, I think, with some of their desensitization methods in terms of getting folks used to different textures in the mouth. There are dietary interventions and some supplementation that in some cases have been shown to improve eating behavior. Ultimately, again, we got to individualize it because there can be different causes behind why a person is not eating an appropriate amount of foods. And so I'd want to do an individual analysis on a person and then pick out what the appropriate interventions would be for that person.
Great. That's why I love the ABA when it comes to these cases, because you guys have such a way of working with these children with autism. It's just phenomenal. But none of these therapies are standalone. It is truly a multidisciplinary approach. I think is the best way we can always help somebody the most. Any other questions out there? Chirotherapy.
Regarding cryotherapy, I don't know much about that.
Well, chirotherapy, and I haven't found any studies on it. It's a similar approach to increasing, like they say, blood flow and oxygen. But if any of you guys are ever interested in what's been published in reputable journals, just type in PubMed, Medline, and go into the National Institute of Health's Mental Health Library and type in chirotherapy and autism spectrum disorder, or ASD or something, and you should be able to see if there is anything on it. Anything you want to research, let's go into good reputable journals and see what they have, because that's where I go first for anything, is see what's been published out there, because there's a lot of things that I don't want people to start, getting wrapped up into something that doesn't have a good, solid, at least suggestive research that it's worth a shot.
I believe there is some research showing that's cryotherapy is the cold therapy, right? Yeah, I believe there is research showing that it does impact measures of overall, like, biological age, meaning reducing characteristics of aging and disease development. So often those kind of things impact, there is some research regarding what cryotherapy does to the body. And basically what you can do, I could do it in a few minutes, you can do it, do some, Googling around, just look up what biological characteristics cryotherapy impacts. And if the autistic individual has those characteristics through different analyses, then you can use that as an intervention to address those characteristics. I believe primarily with the biological aging measures, we're looking at decrease of oxidative stress and inflammation, things like that. So I'm pretty sure cryotherapy impacts some of those things. I think cryotherapy is being shown to be something that really improves the health of everybody. The primary, the research shown most impactful way to improve your overall health and all of these biomarkers of healthy living and longevity is calorie restriction. Eating less food is actually the #1 best way to improve your overall health. Sleep is important as well. So I think if you do things like exercise is extremely important. Exercise is also shown to improve cognitive functioning. Kids that exercise, clearly shown through research to perform better academically. If your child has ADHD, very common comorbid for autism, try having your child do 15 minutes of relatively moderate activity before they sit down and do some work and see if that improves their ability to pay attention. But exercise, healthy diet, calorie restriction, good sleep, and things like cryotherapy, also I think supplementation with some key things. All of these things are good for everybody. And because we see so much going on in the bodies of autistic people in terms of all of these chemical processes that are occurring, these interventions that address overall health are going to be overall good for people with autism as well. It's going to not only give them those overall health benefits, but it's because they have some increased, red flags in some of these biological areas. These interventions are going to help them even more, and improving those general health areas will likely have an impact in some folks, some autistic folks in their cognitive, as well as, other gastrointestinal, energy, other areas as well.
Yeah, do you see that question there about daughter dealing with severe ARFID, and she has 2 autistic children in the chat? Do you see that one, Dave? Can you address that?
Yeah.
Got...
Oh, it's a new one, right? Okay. Dealing with severe. So ARFD is avoidant and restricted food inventory, something. Okay, yeah. So I just learned about ARFID, and I can talk to you about something. His diagnosis is a bigger issue because of phobias of being sick. Each person is very having to use it, teach us various multiple things, but still a lot of things to discover for the kids are teens now. Okay. Yeah, so I didn't even know about ARFID until a few weeks ago. And really ARFID is a diagnosis that you can apply to the characteristics we see with autistic people in terms of the low amount of foods that they often will eat, the very narrow a diet. So it's whether you call it ARFID or whether you just say this is the limited food inventory that we see with a lot of autistic people, doesn't really matter. I think ARFID, you can use that for billing insurance companies, so it's good for professionals and allows you guys to get services through insurance than paying out of pocket for it. But so a lot of the traditional interventions that we talked about earlier for autistic eating patterns can be helpful for ARFID because it's essentially the same thing. Now, I can tell you, actually, I just met with these folks, and I believe it's equip.com. They are, I believe, the nation's largest eating disorder treatment company. And I recently met with them and talked with them. They contacted me, and they treat all sorts of eating disorders, including ARFID. And I asked them, well, does this apply to people on the spectrum? And they said yes. And you can get this through insurance, and it comes with a medical doctor, a therapist. It's like a team of 5 folks, and they do it virtually primarily, and they will coach you in how to go about treating these diagnoses. They look at it as ARFID, again, because I think they can bill that through insurance. And they said they have a pretty high success rate of being able to improve these conditions. So that's just another option that you can check out. They're called Equip. See if there's anything else here. But again, I would really look at the individual characteristics of the person's eating concerns, because it's not going to be the same for everyone. And so when you look at the underlying causes, then you would address those causes specifically for that person. Yeah, I think, well, girls in general have eating disorders much higher than males. I don't know how that shows out in the research for autism, but I'm just trying to see if there's any other questions. Intermittent fasting. Okay. So So intermittent fasting is another good way. It does that caloric restriction. So I don't think it's about how I feel about it. I think intermittent fasting is shown relatively convincingly to be a good thing to do, because one, you're doing caloric restriction, but I think it involves ketosis. It's another way of achieving ketogenesis. I think other than a ketogenic diet, you can do this intermittent fasting, which is basically you only eat for X amount of hours per day. Like you only eat from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. and you don't eat the rest of the time, stuff like that. I think that's pretty clearly shown to improve biological measures of health and aging and things like that. So yeah, I think
Let me throw one thing in there on that though,
Sure.
Dave. The brain hypoglycemia, which you can get from intermittent fasting, the brain needs fuel to operate. I wouldn't be in any intermittent fasting if you were trying to do some testing or trying to do some learning in school, because the brain does not function like that. It needs fuel. It's good for the bodily function. So if you can do it at specific times, but hypoglycemia in the brain, there's been a lot of studies on how that really reduces your ability to function cognitively. But like I say, for the body, there is a lot of good research on that, but not on the brain.
Well, I'm gonna, well, I'll say this. I sort of disagree with that. There is some anecdotal evidence. You can check out Dr. Chris Palmer. He just released a book. He is a psychiatrist, and he has had some success in treating people with severe mental illness with ketogenic diet.
I totally agree with the ketogenic diet. Not at all. Totally. I'm 100% behind that, but not going where you go into hypoglycemia. At that point, the brain starts shutting down.
Oh,
But
okay.
yeah, ketogenic diet, I totally agree.
I don't think intermittent fasting necessarily leads to hypoglycemia. I'm not an expert in this. I'm not a medical doctor. I assume doing intermittent fasting properly can induce more of a healthful ketogenic state. So that's more what I'm talking about is a ketogenic component. But yeah, when doing any type of ketogenic intervention, you also want to make sure that you're eating properly in other areas to make sure you're not going off balance in other areas that that you may need to stay balanced in.
Yeah, I did a study. Actually, I've got the Bianca right here. She's one of my assistants right now. She started with me, and as a 12-year-old in 2009, we did a study on how breakfast choices in children affect their brain performance. And we did an EEG study and a quantitative EEG study on how it changed from not eating any breakfast. We did 3 different EEGs, all at noon, all before lunch. One with no breakfast, one with sugars and carbs like Pop-Tart and orange juice, and one with a balanced nutritional breakfast. And the difference it made in her brain was phenomenal. We published the study when she was in Baylor. And so it's out there that it does affect the brain for, you eat at 6 o'clock at night the next night and you're not eating anything until lunch. That does affect the brain. So there's quite a bit of changes in the brain for this, especially in the high beta activity. In anxiety, and so being able to, and then Pop-Tart and orange juice actually showed the increase in theta activity, which shows a link between ADHD and high sugar, high carb intake. So it was I'll send you that study sometime, Dave. We like to test things around here. We can measure.
Yeah, that's cool. That's the way to do it.
Glad to see you here, Dawn Patrice. Wonderful presentations. All right, guys, I think we've answered all the questions. Unless there's anything else, I think we're going to sign off. Anybody have anything? You can unmute yourself. Okay. All right, Dave. Great job, sir.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
I really appreciate you doing this, and you added quite a bit to it. And you do need to think about getting your PhD, though. I'm serious.
Who's going to pay for it? You going to pay for it? I don't have time. I don't even have time.
That's what everybody says. But so many people out there like you, they're absolutely brilliant and don't get the respect you should. So I'm just saying that.
Okay.
Thank you.
I
Everybody.
appreciate the compliment.
All right. Thank you, guys. Talk to you later. You got the education, you got the knowledge. You just need the pedigree. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.